What if I told you that someone out there has been quietly controlling your emotions for years? Not a dictator, not your parents, not your boss, but everyone, anyone. That stranger who cut in front of you at Starbucks. The coworker who left your message on read. The friend who didn't say thank you when you went out of your way for them. Every single one of them has been pulling your strings like a puppeteer. And the worst part, you didn't even know. Nick didn't know either. He was 34, lived in a Brooklyn apartment that overlooked a noisy intersection, worked as a marketing manager at a mid-sized agency in Manhattan. From the outside, he had things together. But his mornings were war zones, not with anyone else, just himself. He'd wake up to a single unread email and spiral into panic. He'd catch a passive glance from his manager and start drafting resignation letters in his head. If his girlfriend went quiet for more than 5 minutes, he'd rehearse entire arguments alone in the shower, stabbing invisible points into the air. He thought he was just sensitive. He thought that meant he was honest, passionate, emotionally tuned in. But what Nick didn't realize is that being constantly pulled by everything around him wasn't sensitivity. It was slavery. That realization came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. It started with a rushed argument before work, a sarcastic jab over breakfast. He slammed the door and left angry. The elevator was slow. The train was late. By the time he stepped into the office, the storm inside him was howling. His manager, James, looked up from his desk and said 5 words that detonated like a bomb. "We'll talk after lunch." That was it. Nothing more. Just 5 syllables. But Nick heard it like a death sentence. His heart pounded. His hands went cold. The voices in his head started screaming, "You're in trouble. He's disappointed in you. You're getting fired." He sat through the morning with a fake smile glued to his face, unable to hear what anyone said. When James finally waved him into his office hours later, Nick's legs felt numb. He braced himself for disaster. But what came out of James's mouth? "I want you to lead the new campaign. You've been doing great." Nick didn't respond. Couldn't. His brain couldn't catch up to the fact that there was no emergency. All the emotional chaos he'd lived that morning was fiction. A story, created and weaponized by his own mind. He walked out of the office in silence, eyes blank, like someone had just unplugged him from the Matrix. That evening, still numb, he wandered aimlessly into a small bookstore tucked away behind a cafe in Greenwich Village. He wasn't looking for anything, but the universe has a strange way of guiding people to what they need when they're finally cracked open. He found an old copy of Discourses by Epictetus wedged between 2 oversized psychology books. He flipped it open to a random page. "And read, as long as you care what others think of you, you are their slave." He read it again, slower. That sentence shattered something in him, because Nick finally understood what had been happening all these years. He had never been free. He had handed over control of his peace, his self-worth, his inner world, to anyone who offered a comment, a look, a pause. He wasn't living. He was reacting, every day, to everything. And that night, for the first time in years, he fell asleep with a sense of clarity instead of anxiety. Not because his life had changed, but because his perspective had cracked open. He saw the cage he was in, and when you see the cage, you can begin to build the key. The next morning, when his girlfriend made another sarcastic comment, he didn't react. He didn't flinch. He looked at her, smiled gently, and said, "Hope your day goes better than mine started." No venom, no pushback, just calm. And for once, that calm came from inside. This is where our journey begins. Because if Nick could wake up from his emotional slavery, so can you. Over the next lessons, you'll discover how to harden your mind, rewire your reactions, and become untouchable no matter what the world throws at you. If you felt like Nick, if you've been holding your breath, waiting for the next emotional blow, then you're in the right place. Stay with me, because the truth you're about to learn might hurt, but it will also set you free. If this resonates with you, hit that subscribe button. Support the channel so we can keep bringing stories and lessons that help you take back control of your peace. Now, let me ask you something simple to start rewiring your awareness. Which statement best describes your current state? A. I feel calm most days, even when things go wrong. B. My mood depends heavily on how others treat me. Drop your answer in the comments below, A or B. I want to know where you're starting from, because every journey starts with honesty. Nick didn't become stoic in one night. The moment he closed the book of Epictetus, he didn't magically stop reacting to chaos or insults, but something inside him shifted. For the first time, he realized that if he wanted to stop being hijacked by the world, he needed to prepare for it, not with toughness, not with ego, but with mental armor. That's what Stoicism really is. Not about suppressing emotion, but about training the mind like a warrior trains for battle. You don't wait until arrows fly to build a shield. You craft it before the fight. And for Nick, the fight wasn't with other people. It was with himself. He started waking up earlier. Not to scroll, not to check emails, but to sit in quiet. At first, it was just 5 minutes. Sitting by the window, eyes still heavy with sleep, watching the early light stretch across the buildings of Brooklyn. Then 10 minutes, then 20. He wasn't meditating in the traditional sense. He was rehearsing calm. He'd ask himself, what chaos might I meet today? And instead of dreading it, he pictured himself meeting each disruption with stillness. A colleague who might be passive-aggressive, a stranger who might be rude on the subway, a task that might fall apart. He saw them coming, like ships on the horizon. Not to worry about them, just to stop being surprised. That was the first layer of armor. Expectation. Most people get crushed by life not because it's too hard, but because they thought it would be easy. We suffer more in surprise than in struggle. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this daily. He woke each morning, reminding himself that people would be impatient, selfish, deceitful. And when they were, he could meet them with preparation instead of pain. Nick made a choice to do the same, and it changed everything. The second layer of armor came through observation. One afternoon, while waiting in line at a crowded grocery store, a man behind him sighed loudly, muttered something under his breath, and nudged Nick's heel with his cart. The old Nick would have snapped, maybe even started an argument. But this time, Nick just glanced back, nodded politely, and turned forward again. Not because he was weak, but because he was training. His mind said react, his training said wait. So he waited. By the time he got to the cashier, the storm had passed, and for the first time, he felt the quiet satisfaction of choosing his peace over being right. That's the kind of power Stoicism gives you. Not loud, not flashy, but deeply rooted and unshakable. Nick also started something new, a ritual he called locking the gate. Each morning before leaving his apartment, he'd place one hand over his chest and say, softly but clearly, nothing and no one takes my calm today. It wasn't magic, but it anchored his intention. He was reminding himself that his peace was no longer public property. He wouldn't hand it over for free, not to an email, not to a stranger, not even to someone he loved. His calm was his, earned, protected. He started noticing how others walked through the world without armor, reacting to every honk, every glance, every unmet expectation. He saw in them the version of himself he was leaving behind, and instead of judging them, he felt compassion, because he knew how exhausting it was to live without a shield to reinforce. This shift, Nick created something strange and simple, a playlist. He called it Peace Mode. It was filled with music that made him feel grounded, not necessarily calm music, but songs that reminded him of who he wanted to be when the world pushed. He played it while brushing his teeth, tying his shoes, brewing coffee. It became the soundtrack to his preparation, because like any warrior, Nick understood that mindset is momentum. How you begin shapes how you respond, and if you enter the day half-armed, don't be surprised when the first blow knocks you down. Building mental armor isn't a one-time act. It's not something you do once and forget. It's forged each morning, in silence, in observation, in small choices. And it's tested daily by life's unpredictability. The goal isn't to stop the world from being what it is. The goal is to stop handing the world the blueprint to your inner peace. Nick didn't stop being human. He still felt irritation. He still had doubts. But now, he had armor. And with that armor, he could move through chaos untouched. Because real strength isn't in force, it's in restraint. Real calm isn't silence, it's sovereignty. And mental armor isn't a wall, it's a gate, one you choose to open or not. And every morning, Nick locked it and walked out ready. Nick's biggest breakthrough didn't come from philosophy books or silent rituals. It came one Tuesday afternoon in the middle of a packed subway car. He was wedged between a man arguing loudly on the phone and a woman furiously typing into her laptop, elbows flying. The train lurched. Someone spilled coffee. Someone else cursed. In the past, Nick would have felt trapped, irritated, anxious. He would have scanned every face, wondering if they were looking at him, judging him, mocking him in some private joke. But that day, he didn't. That day, something different clicked. He realized he was not the center of the storm. He was just in it, and that changed everything. Detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's knowing the chaos outside you doesn't have to reach the place within you. Most people confuse detachment with indifference, but Nick was starting to learn that it was actually the opposite. You can care deeply and still not get dragged into every emotional current that passes you by. That's what Stoic detachment means, staying grounded while everything around you sways. This shift didn't come from reading, it came from practice, like the day he stood in line at a DMV in downtown Brooklyn. He had been waiting nearly 40 minutes. The woman behind the counter was clearly overwhelmed, and the man next to him kept muttering, louder and louder, about government inefficiency. Then suddenly, the man snapped. He slammed his hand on the counter, shouting at the clerk, and turned to Nick with a sneer. "You just gonna stand there? You're part of the problem." The words were bait. In the past, Nick would have snapped back, defended himself, matched rage with rage. But this time, he didn't flinch. He looked at the man, calm and steady, and replied, "I'm just waiting. My turn, like everyone else." Then he turned back around. He didn't gloat. He didn't feel superior. What he felt was distance. Not apathy, but emotional space. The kind that keeps you from drowning in someone else's storm. This was the muscle he'd been training without realizing. The ability to observe without absorbing. The power to be present without performing. And that led him to another realization. Most of his anxiety didn't come from what people actually said or did. It came from what he thought they might be thinking, from stories he made up in his head. He remembered standing in a gym weeks earlier, feeling exposed during squats, convinced a pair of strangers were laughing at him. His shirt clung to him awkwardly. His grip felt wrong. The moment felt huge, crushing. But now, in hindsight, it seemed absurd. They weren't even looking at him. That moment had been about his ego, not their attention. The more Nick practiced emotional distance, the more he saw how much of his suffering had been imaginary, how much energy he'd spent performing for an audience that wasn't even watching. And when he let go of that need to be perceived in a certain way, something strange happened. He felt lighter. It was as if his nervous system had taken a deep breath for the first time in years. To reinforce that awareness, he began doing something odd. Once a week, Nick would walk into a public place with no agenda. No phone, no book, no headphones. He'd sit, order a drink, and simply observe. Not with judgment, not with self-consciousness, but with intention. He called it the observer's hour. It was a time to practice, not reacting, not interpreting, just being. At first it felt uncomfortable. He'd reach for his phone without thinking. He'd scan faces for signs of judgment. But slowly, week by week, that urge faded. He learned to be invisible, and in doing so, he found power. There is a unique strength in being at peace in a world obsessed with attention. Nick wasn't trying to disappear. He was trying to reappear in his own life. And each moment he spent detached from the theater of other people's opinions brought him closer to that. There's one final piece he discovered that tied it all together. Something deceptively simple, but surprisingly effective. Cold showers. Every morning, after his quiet ritual, Nick would end his shower with 30 seconds of freezing water. Not to prove anything, not to test his limits, but to train stillness in discomfort. If he could breathe through that, he could breathe through anything. The angry driver, the snarky email, the silent treatment. It all became less threatening when his body learned not to panic at the first sign of discomfort. Emotional distance isn't disconnection. It's discipline. It's saying, this moment doesn't get to rewrite who I am. It's reminding yourself, again and again, that not every opinion deserves a reaction, that not every look is a judgment, that your peace does not require permission from anyone. Nick didn't vanish from the world. He just stopped trying to win it over, and in doing so, he started to win back himself. Nick never expected his greatest teachers to come disguised as inconveniences, as annoyances, as people who seemed born to test his patience. But that's exactly what began to unfold. The more committed he became to building a Stoic life, the more he noticed the same thing repeating over and over again. What used to trigger him now presented an opportunity. Every irritation, every interruption, every emotional sting whispered the same quiet truth. This is your training. He started to see it everywhere. In the barista who got his order wrong for the third day in a row, in the delivery driver who left his package in the rain, and the colleague who always seemed to speak over him in meetings. These weren't enemies. They were mirrors. And what they reflected wasn't about them. It was about Nick. That realization cut deep at first, because it meant taking radical ownership. No more blaming. No more waiting for the world to be less chaotic. If someone got under his skin, it wasn't their fault. It was a signal, a lesson. Something inside him still needed work, so he started writing them down. Every night, Nick kept a small notebook he called the trigger list. Each page had 2 columns. On the left, the situation. On the right, what it revealed. For example, left, coworker dismissing my idea. Right, I still tie my worth to being validated. Left, ignored text from a friend. Right, fear of being forgotten or unimportant. Left, crowded train during rush hour. Right, need for control in chaotic spaces. Over time, the notebook became a map, not of what others had done to him, but of where he still needed to grow stronger. It wasn't easy. Sometimes the insights stung more than the moment itself, but they were real, and they gave him direction. The breakthrough came one evening at a neighborhood meeting in Brooklyn. Nick had volunteered to help with organizing a local park cleanup. During the meeting, a man named Carlos, known for interrupting everyone, cut Nick off mid-sentence and corrected him in front of the group. The room went quiet. Nick's face flushed. He felt the old tension rise in his throat, the urge to assert himself, to fire back. But instead, he paused. He remembered the trigger list. He remembered what it meant. This wasn't about Carlos. This was about Nick's discomfort with being challenged, his need to prove he was competent, his fear of looking small. So he breathed, looked at Carlos, and said, "Thanks for the input. Want to help me fine-tune the plan after the meeting?" Carlos nodded, surprised. The conversation moved on, and Nick felt a strange calm settle in his chest. That had been a test, and he had passed it. Gratitude began to grow, not the passive kind, but fierce gratitude, active appreciation for the people and moments that forced him to see himself more clearly. He started to silently thank those who irritated him. Thank you for showing me where I still cling to control. Thank you for reminding me I don't need to be understood to stay composed. Thank you for helping me strengthen what was once fragile. The more he practiced this mindset, the more resilient he became. He even began to call his daily commute his emotional gym. Every delayed train, every honk, every unexpected confrontation was a rep, a chance to grow stronger. And just like in the actual gym, he learned to embrace the burn, because the discomfort was building something solid. Nick also changed the way he approached helping others. He used to be quick to give advice, especially when he saw people making decisions that didn't make sense to him. But the Stoic in him knew better now. People, like him, needed their own triggers, their own lessons, their own Carlos moments. So he let them. He stopped forcing wisdom onto others and started offering presence instead. That meant listening without interrupting, asking questions instead of giving answers, trusting that growth happens at its own pace. He became the quiet mirror in other people's storms, and in doing so, deepened his own calm. The final shift came when Nick began to flip his inner language. Instead of saying, "Why is this happening to me?" he replaced it with, "What is this trying to teach me?" That single sentence reframed every difficulty. Every challenge became a classroom. Every trigger became a door to greater clarity. He realized that a truly strong mind isn't one that avoids pain. It's one that can sit with it, learn from it, and walk away wiser. And in that process, you don't just become calm, you become free. Not because life is less triggering, but because you've made peace with the discomfort it offers. That was Nick's secret now. He didn't fight the world anymore. He studied it, translated its chaos into self-mastery, and every time something poked his peace, he smiled a little inside. Another lesson, another rep, another step toward becoming untouchable from within. Nick had always thought confidence came from being liked, from recognition, from having something to show, whether it was approval from his boss, a compliment from his girlfriend, or a comment from a friend validating his opinion. He clung to external proof that he mattered. But what looked like self-worth on the surface was really self-worry in disguise. It became most obvious in quiet moments, the ones without applause. The nights he posted something online and watched it sit there, untouched. The days he worked hard but received no acknowledgement. The casual silences in conversations when someone chose not to react the way he hoped they would. In those moments, his chest tightened. A familiar voice whispered, "Maybe you're not enough." For years, Nick ran from that voice. He drowned it in performance, trying to be impressive, agreeable, efficient, interesting. But all that effort only made the silence louder. It wasn't until he began practicing stillness that he could finally hear what was underneath it. The fear that without validation, he'd disappear. That fear, he realized, was the true enemy. One night, he sat alone in his apartment, lights low, the city humming outside his window. He thought back to when he was a kid, building Lego cities, on the living room floor. Hours would pass, and no one was watching. No one was clapping, and still, he was full. Not because he had anything to prove, but because he was creating something for its own sake. That memory hit him like a wave. The version of himself who didn't need an audience, who felt whole without applause. That version hadn't vanished. He had just been buried under years of needing to be seen. From that night on, Nick made a choice. He would stop outsourcing his value. He would stop handing his worth over to the next message reply, performance review, or passing glance. He would start defining himself from the inside out. But change didn't come from affirmations or pep talks. It came from action. Quiet, steady action. He began saying no to things that didn't feel right, even if they made him look better. He skipped parties he wasn't interested in. He stopped posting things just to get attention. He began creating for himself again, writing, drawing, thinking without needing to share it. He also started a new habit. Every night before bed, he would ask himself one question: did I honor myself today? Not did I impress anyone, not did I win anything, but did I act in alignment with what mattered to me? Some nights, the answer was no, and that was fine, because awareness was the first step toward change. But more often than not, as the days passed, the answer became yes. There was a particular moment that sealed this shift. One afternoon, during a family group chat, his cousin made a snide remark in front of everyone. Something about how Nick only showed up when there was free food. It was the kind of joke that used to sting, that would have made him rush to defend himself or withdraw silently. But this time, Nick didn't feel the pull. Not because he was better than the comment, but because he no longer needed to fight for a seat at the table. He already belonged to himself, so he read the message, smiled gently, and kept scrolling. No reply, no drama, just calm. That moment wasn't about being passive. It was about being rooted. Nick knew who he was. One comment couldn't touch that. He didn't need to prove anything because he had finally stopped believing that. His worth was a transaction, and the unexpected happened. His relationships deepened. His conversations became more honest. He no longer had to perform to connect. The more grounded he became in himself, the more others respected that ground, not because he demanded it, but because he radiated something unshakable. Self-worth, he learned, is quiet. It doesn't need to declare itself. It doesn't beg to be noticed. It just is. Like a mountain that doesn't move when the wind howls. Like a tree that keeps growing even when no one is clapping for its leaves. Nick found peace, not by becoming louder, but by becoming stiller. Not by adding things, but by letting go. He no longer chased attention because he finally trusted his own. And in that trust, he discovered the most liberating truth of all. You don't need to be seen to be valuable. You don't need to be chosen to be whole. You already are. You just have to stop looking outside long enough to remember. It was a Thursday morning when Nick missed his flight. The sky was heavy with rain. Traffic had swallowed his cab. And by the time he reached the airport gate, the doors were already closed. He stood there for a moment, breath shallow, pulse racing, watching the blinking departure screen as if it might reverse time. The old Nick would have unraveled right there. He would have cursed the city, blamed the airline, replayed every wrong turn that led him to this moment. But instead, he sat down. He didn't fight it. He didn't call anyone. He just sat, watching people move through the terminal like waves brushing against rock. Something had shifted in him. Not because he no longer cared, but because he had finally learned that peace isn't the absence of problems. It's the refusal to let problems own your mind. He pulled out his notebook and began to write. Not in frustration, but with curiosity. What if this delay wasn't a failure? What if this inconvenience held a purpose he couldn't yet see? An hour later, as he sipped coffee at a small airport cafe, he saw the news on the overhead television. The flight he had missed had turned back midair due to mechanical failure. No injuries, but it was serious enough to make headlines. Passengers had been rushed off the plane during emergency procedures. Nick froze for a second, coffee halfway to his lips. Then he exhaled and smiled. Sometimes peace comes from preparation. Other times, it comes from surrender. From letting go of the idea that you must know the meaning of every moment as it's happening. The Stoics had a word for this way of living. Amor fati, love of fate. Not just acceptance, not tolerance. Love, choosing to see every twist of life as part of the path, not a distraction from it. Nick had learned that bad days don't always mean bad outcomes. That often the worst things don't destroy you. They redirect you. The lost opportunity that leads to a better one. The relationship that ends so you can finally start building one with yourself. The plan that crumbles, revealing a door you didn't know existed. To live like this, you need more than perspective. You need practice. That's why Nick kept what he called the good or bad journal. Each night, before bed, he would write down 2 things that irritated or disappointed him during the day. Then, next to each one, he would force himself to write a possible benefit. Not a fantasy, just a possibility. Maybe that delayed meeting gave him time to prepare better. Maybe that difficult conversation revealed something hidden. Maybe that moment of rejection taught him exactly where he still doubted himself. Not every entry made sense immediately. Some still don't. But by doing the exercise, Nick trained his mind to stop rushing to label events as good or bad. He gave space for meaning to emerge, slowly. Naturally, he also started rehearsing discomfort. Every morning, while brushing his teeth or tying his shoes, he would speak out loud the things he didn't want to hear. Today I will be misunderstood. Today someone might be rude. Today my plans might fail. He didn't say it to manifest chaos. He said it to stop being shocked by it. Because it's not the hardship that breaks you. It's the surprise of it. And when you expect turbulence, you can fly straight through it. The final step, the one Nick didn't even realize he had taken until much later, was the choice. The simple, quiet, daily choice to choose peace. Not as a concept, but as a commitment. Every time life gave him a reason to react, to explode, to despair, he would ask himself one question: is this worth my peace? Most of the time, it wasn't. So he chose stillness. He chose grace. He chose to let small things stay small. There's a difference between being calm and being a slave to calm. Nick didn't run from emotion. He just stopped letting it run him. He didn't pretend life was gentle. He just refused to let it rough him up from the inside. And that's what it means to live like a Stoic in modern chaos. Not to become cold, but to become clear. To stop living on emotional autopilot and start living with conscious response. With inner steadiness, with dignity. Nick no longer needed peace to arrive at his door. He carried it with him, like breath, like heartbeat, like truth. He had become the storm's still center, and from there, nothing could shake him. Not because the world had changed, but because he had. Nick didn't set out to become a Stoic. He didn't wake up one day craving ancient philosophy or life-altering change. All he wanted was to stop feeling like a prisoner inside his own mind. What began with a moment of panic, a simple phrase from his boss that spiraled into imagined disaster, turned into a long, quiet revolution. Not the kind with flags and speeches. The kind that happens slowly, behind the eyes, inside the chest. The kind that rewires how you walk through the world. He was just an ordinary man, living in Brooklyn, juggling work stress, relationship tension, and the invisible weight of trying to hold himself together. For years, his emotions ran the show. One text message could derail his entire day. A dirty look from a stranger could live in his head for hours. He handed over his peace like it was a disposable item. Like calm was something other people were allowed to steal. But that all changed when he met an idea bigger than his anxiety, that no one else owns your reactions unless you give them the keys. That insight, hidden in the worn pages of a philosophy book he hadn't even planned to buy, began to crack the shell of who he thought he had to be. Nick didn't become perfect. He didn't stop feeling. He just stopped believing that every feeling needed to become a reaction. He built routines. He guarded his mornings. He rewrote the stories he told himself in the heat of stress. He learned to pause, breathe, and ask better questions. Not why is this happening to me, but what is this here to teach me? He stopped needing the approval of people who didn't understand him. He stopped fearing silence. He stopped rushing to defend his worth. And perhaps most powerfully of all, he stopped being shocked by the storm. He trained for it. He rehearsed it. And when it came, he didn't flinch. Instead of resisting life, Nick began to move with it. When people were rude, he didn't match their noise. When plans failed, he didn't collapse. He didn't try to bend the world to his will. He bent himself into something stronger, something supple, unbreakable, and calm. He learned that peace is not passive. It is a choice, a decision you make 100 times a day. To stay grounded when the world spins. To respond when others react. To breathe when everything in you wants to rage or retreat. He wasn't chasing happiness anymore. He was building strength. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need a stage. The kind that's felt in silence, in stillness, in the decision to walk away from drama, from overthinking, from self-betrayal. In the end, Nick didn't just become immune to anger and anxiety. He became something even rarer. A man who knew how to suffer wisely, how to face discomfort with clarity, how to protect his inner world no matter what. Chaos knocked on the door, and that's the real heart of this story. The lesson isn't that life gets easier. It's that you get stronger. The world will still be messy. People will still disappoint you. Delays will still happen. Comments will still sting. But the difference now is that you don't have to hand over your power. You don't have to play every role someone casts you in. You don't have to make everything personal. You can pause. You can breathe. You can choose how to respond. And in that pause, you take back control. In that breath, you claim your space. In that choice, you build your peace. So here's the question to sit with now. Are you ready to stop living at the mercy of everything and everyone around you? Are you ready to stop outsourcing your calm, your clarity, your value? Because if Nick can change, so can you. And not by becoming someone new, but by returning to who you were before the world taught you to react to everything. You were born calm. You were born steady. You were born free. And now, you get to remember. So let me ask you this. What resonated with you most in Nick's journey? Was it the way he reframed discomfort? Was it the moment he stopped defending himself? Was it learning how to pause instead of react? Let me know in the comments below. Share your favorite lesson or your own story about choosing calm in a chaotic moment. Someone else might read it and find the strength they've been looking for. And if this story spoke to you, if you feel a little more grounded, a little more awake, then do me a favor, subscribe to the channel. That simple act gives us the motivation to keep creating content that speaks to your soul and helps others find the same peace you're building now. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing calm. See you in the next one.